This is Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa. The story of resurgent and burgeoning Africa is here, only on the Pulse of Africa channel. Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa. This is Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa. The story of resurgent and burgeoning Africa is here, only on the Pulse of Africa channel. Pulse of Africa, the face and voice of Africa.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Pulse of Africa News live from Addis Ababa, the diplomatic hub of Africa. We bring you the top stories from across the continent. Magdalena, stay tuned. We will begin with Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam. Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, GERD, has been highlighted by the African Union Commission, AUC, as a leading example of domestic resource mobilization, with officials urging African countries to replicate similar model to finance critical infrastructure and reduce reliance on external funding. Speaking on the margins of the AU summit, the AUC Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy said shifting global economic conditions, rising capital costs and declining development assistance require Africa to rethink how it funds long-term projects. She pointed to GERD's largely domesticated financed construction as proof that transformative infrastructure can be delivered through national commitment and citizen participation.
The Ethiopian Renaissance Dam as an example of domestic resource mobilization, certainly. The fact that majority of it is funded by citizens, and the fact that the funding really was Ethiopia itself mobilizing from different sources within, that is actually a very good example that for the most part needs to be emulated. And that's the heart of domestic resource mobilization, right? It's your citizens, it's your own enterprises, etc. So the answer to your question is yes. It's a good example of domestic resource mobilization.
With the AU's 2026, a theme focused on sustainable water management and sanitation, the Commissioner described water as a core economic infrastructure essential to industrialization. She noted that nearly 300 million Africans lack access to safe drinking water and about 780 million people lack adequate sanitation. Gaps that directly affect productivity, public health, and investment potential. Closing the water infrastructure deficit alone requires an estimated $30 billion. The Commissioner emphasized the need to accelerate implementations on the AU's Program for Infrastructure Development in African, PIDA, which includes 69 priority cross-border projects in transport, energy, ICT, and water. She stressed that infrastructure planning must be insulated from political cycles and integrated into national development strategies to ensure continuity and long-term impact.
Ethiopia's supply of water to Djibouti, as an example to other countries, certainly. When we are talking about African integration, we are talking about, it's not just about trade of products, as it were. It's also trade of our own resources among ourselves for our own development. So water to Djibouti by Ethiopia is critical. We mentioned earlier that water is fundamental to productivity. It's fundamental to human health. It's fundamental to the delivery of our manufacturing requirements, whether we are talking at a base level, just the factory that manufactures widgets, or we are talking now in the new industries like the data centers. When you're talking the digital, there's a huge water requirement in those sorts of infrastructure, in that sort of infrastructure. So the supply of water to neighboring countries is quite important.
She also underscored the importance of unlocking Africa's own financial resources, noting that an estimated $4.6 trillion in African financial assets, including pension funds, remain underutilized. Calling for diversified partnerships and stronger local participation, she urged the countries to negotiate infrastructure deals on African terms, promote local content and skills development, and deepen regional cooperation in strategic resources such as water and energy. Framing GERD as more than a national achievement, the commissioner said it represents a broader continental lesson. African sustainable development will increasingly depend on its ability to finance its own priorities, strengthen regional integration, and build resilient infrastructure that supports industrial growth. Lesotho, often described as the water tower of Southern Africa, is positioning itself as a critical partner in the Continent 2026 focus on sustainable water management, according to an inclusive interview with the kingdom's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lejon Maputonja, by Pulse of Africa. Minister Maputonja emphasized Lesotho's pivotal role in supplying water to key Southern African countries, noting that many of the region's major rivers flow from Lesotho downstream to South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, and beyond. He stressed that effective implementations on the African Union theme for 2026 on water and sanitation will require extensive consultations and collaboration with both regional partners and international institutions.
Lesotho is endowed with abundant water, and Lesotho is the water tower of the Southern African region, meaning that most rivers in the southern region, they flow from Lesotho downstream. And this is one of the most important subjects for Lesotho as the water source for the Southern African region. And for us to implement this theme of the year, first of all, we need more consultations, we need more engagements on all partners that are involved in the Lesotho Highlands water, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, as well as international organizations that are involved in the water resources management. As Lesotho, we intend to invite the UN Water, which is one of the critical institutions in the UN system that is dealing with water, in order to capacitate our partners on how to deal with this important resource. And therefore, as Lesotho, we are a critical partner and a strategic partner in this theme of the year.
Lesotho intends to invite UN Water, which is the UN's special institution on water resource management, to help capacitate our partners on how to sustainably manage these critical resources. The minister said he described Lesotho as a critical and strategic partner in advancing Africa's water agenda. On broader development issues, Minister Maputonja highlighted the importance of strong multilateral systems for smaller economies like Lesotho. We believe in stronger multilateral organizations where our voice is heard, he said, adding, "Together, two hands can clap, a single hand cannot."
Lesotho believes in stronger multilateral system. Lesotho is a member of SADC, Lesotho is the member of the AU, and Lesotho is a member of the UN. and we advocate for stronger multilateral organizations, which is where, as a smaller country, as a smaller economy, our voice is heard. So we believe we have to maintain the multilateral organizations and ensure that they speak volume, because together, two hands can only clap. A single hand cannot clap. One of the key sources of conflict is underdevelopment. One of the key sources for conflict is over-reliance on external parties. As African countries, we have to identify our problems. We have to build our own capacity to be productive. We have to ensure that we own our own economies as African countries. So the African Union has to play a role in building economic development in Africa.
He also linked underdevelopment and economic dependency to potential sources of conflict across the continent. One of the key sources of conflict is underdevelopment. Another is over resilience and external parties. He said African countries must identify their own problems, build capacity, and take ownership of their economies. The minister underscored the African Union's role in fostering economic development, stating that the continental cooperation and self-reliance are essential for sustainable peace and growth. Lesotho's leadership and water management, he said, exemplifies how similar African nations can play an outsized role in regional development initiatives. By advocating for strengthened regional partnership, enhanced capacity building, and ownership of critical resources, Lesotho is asserting itself as a proactive voice in shaping Africa's sustainable development priorities for 2026 and beyond. The 48th Ordinary Sessions of the African Union Executive Council has elected 10 member states to serve on the AU's Peace and Security Council, PSC, for the 2026-28 term, strengthening the continent's primary organ for conflict prevention and crisis response. The newly elected members are Benin, Gabon, Lesotho, Morocco, Somalia, and South Africa, while Cote d'Ivoire and the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, and Uganda were re-elected to continue their service. The new mandate will run from 1st April 2026 to 31st March 2028. Established in 2004, the PSC is the AU's standing decision-making body for the prevention, management, and resolution of conflicts. The 15-member councils authorize peace support operations, impose sanctions, addresses unconstitutional change of government, and coordinates counter-terrorism efforts across the continent. The council operates within the African Peace and Security Architecture, which includes the Continental Early Warning System, the African Standby Force, and the Panel of the Wise. Its role has become increasingly significant, aimed ongoing security challenges in the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and parts of Central and Eastern Africa. The elected members are expected to be formally endorsed by heads of states and government during the 39th Ordinary Session of the AU Assembly, scheduled for 14th to 15th February 2026 in Addis Ababa, as the Union advances efforts to strengthen African-led peace initiatives and implements its silencing the guns agenda. The African Union prioritized peace and security through mediation, negotiation, and Peace and Security Council. It works to prevent conflict and to address root causes for the lasting stability across the continent. Progress in regional cooperation and conflict prevention both support the broader development growth across our continent. These efforts strengthen our resilience and pave the way for sovereignty across the continent. And all African leaders will be focusing to reinforce these mechanisms on the 39th session of the African Union Assembly from February 14th to 15th, 2026, right here in Addis Ababa. And we, Pulse of Africa, will be your trusted media platform where you get all information across the continent. Make sure to stay tuned.
If you don't tell your story, it will be told by others. They'll talk of hunger, they'll talk of war, they'll talk of conflict, but they'll not say the things that are happening in Africa that are positive.
This is POA. a very new media organization in Ethiopia.
We have to be voice for ourselves. There is no one else that can tell our story better than us.
If it's defending African matters, then go for it. Go for Pulse Media.
This is the Pulse of Africa. Tune in, follow the journey, and learn about the news and what's shaping our African continent.
I am really impressed by the work that they are doing by telling the African story from Africa for Africans. I think it's definitely needed.
Please subscribe to the Pulse of Africa on all platforms.
Ghana is leading a renewed effort at the United Nations to have the transatlantic slave trade formally declared a crime against humanity, intensifying Africans' campaign for reparatory justice and historical accountability. Speaking on behalf of African states, Ghana representative urged the international community to recognize the lasting social, economic, and psychological consequences of the slave trade on Africa and the global African diaspora.
Consistent with the Accra Declaration on Reparations and the AU Assembly's decision on reparative justice, Ghana, on behalf of the African Union, intends to table a resolution at the United Nations General Assembly on the 25th of March this year, seeking the formal and universal recognition of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery as the gravest crime against humanity. Ghana formally requests the unflinching support and co-sponsorship of all AU member states for this resolution. We have already worked extensively with experts in the African Union, in the CARICOM Commission, and in the larger diaspora community. And we believe that this is a time to secure justice. By standing together at the United Nations, we signal to the world that Africa will no longer allow the scale of its historical suffering to be minimized.
The proposal frames the transatlantic slave trade not only as a historical atrocity, but as a crime whose legacy continues to reshape global inequalities. Diplomatic sources indicate that the initiative seeks to strengthen the legal and moral basis for discussion on reparation, restitution, and structural redress. Supporters urge that formal recognition by the UN would add significant weight to calls for meaningful engagement between affected nations and former slave trade powers. Ghana has positioned itself at the forefront of the respiratory justice movement, notably through initiatives such as the Year of Return and sustained diaspora outreach programs. Officials stress that the push is aimed at promoting historical truth, reconciliation, and equitable development rather than division. The move aligns with broader African Union efforts to advance respiratory justice within the framework of long-term continental development. If adopted, the declaration could mark a pivotal moment in global discourses on accountability and open new avenues for structured dialogue on operations. Côte d'Ivoire is positioning itself as a key player in Africa's water and ecological transition agenda, emphasizing sustainable resource management, regional cooperation, and multilateral engagement, according to an exclusive interview with Abu Bamba, Minister of Environment and Ecological Transition. Speaking to Pulse of Africa, Minister Bamba highlighted the critical role of water as both a natural resource and an economic asset for the continent. One of the key sources of conflict is underdevelopment, and over-reliance on external partners undermines our progress. African countries must identify their challenges, build capacity, and take ownership of their economics, he said.
Our country is heavily investing in the sector of sanitation and accession to water for several reasons. I mean, water plays an important role in our overall socio-economic development process. It provides potable water for the population. We use water for navigation. We use water for energy. We use water for agriculture. And water is also an excellent strategical positioning for our country in the sub-region. So we are almost at that universal access to safe drinking water for the entire population in Côte d'Ivoire. So we are very happy. We're making some progress here at the conference in Addis Ababa. And we hope of the same that all the African countries will access potable water, for the entire continent.
Côte d'Ivoire, he noted, is committed to the African Union's 2026 theme, assuring sustainable water availability and safe sanitation systems, and plans to engage actively with regional neighbors and international partners, including UN Water, to strengthen water resource management. The minister stressed that effective multilateral systems amplify the voices of smaller economies, allowing nations like Côte d'Ivoire to contribute meaningfully to continental development. Together, two hands can clap, a single hand cannot. This is why cooperation, dialogue, and strong continental framework are essential for Africans' development and peace. Minister Bamba explained linking sustainable resource management to regional stability and conflict prevention.
Water is equally important as sanitation facilities, because if they don't have proper sanitation facilities, this could be a source of problem of waterborne diseases and even some health issues across the nation. So we need to balance both access to potable water and also access to proper sanitation facilities for the well-being of our populations.
The minister's remarks came aimed growing efforts to advance Africans' ecological transition and infrastructure sovereignty as countries across the continent seek to mobilize domestic resources and reduce dependence on external financing. Côte d'Ivoire advocates for local ownership of natural resources and capacity building initiatives that enable African nations to drive their own development. Through its leadership in water and ecological management, Côte d'Ivoire aims to contribute to regional integration, economic resilience, and sustainable industrialization, positioning itself as a strategic partner in Africa's broader development agenda. Political science researcher Dawit Mazgaba has called for greater unity among African nations to address water preservation and development, emphasizing that water issues transcend single sectors and require holistic, multi-sectoral approaches. In an exclusive interview with Pulse of Africa, the researcher highlighted the deep interconnection between water, humanity, development, peace, and security. He described water as a critical resource directly linked to broader socio-economic progress and continental stability. Dawit praised the African Union AU for its timely decision to hold the 39th Ordinary Summit under the theme Assuring Sustainable Water Availability and Safe Sanitation System to achieve the goals of Agenda 2063.
Water, it's not only about sanitation. Water is having an important relation with conflict, with violence, even with development. You cannot think of any development without water. So this is a very timely ordinary session, and the issue of water is the most important one. As I have said, if African leaders, if the African states are supposed to pay the proper attention with regard to the issue of water, then the political, economic, social, and in terms of peace and security, all those aspects, the burden is supposed to be minimized. Maybe we just can have broader, not only vision, but success with regard to Agenda 2063.
This focus, he noted, aligns perfectly with the continent's long-term vision, as effective management of water-related challenges can alleviate multiple burdens and accelerate progress towards Agenda 2063 aspirations. He stressed the need for African countries to adapt comprehensive policies that tackle water issues in an integrated manner. Such policy frameworks should draw insights from diverse fields of study, given the cross-cutting nature of water resources.
Policies which incorporate politics, policies which incorporate economic issues, policies which incorporate social issues should have to be put into place. So the unity of Africa must not be only on a politics or on a slogan, but in sharing even resources too. Not only in sharing, but in preserving resources too. Not only in preserving, but in thinking about the coming future, the generation too. So we need, from all sorts of academic fields, those professionals, those researchers should have to come up and somewhat provide multifaceted policy.
The researcher urged AU member states to enhance collaboration on water resource development and management in particular. He emphasized moving beyond mere political unity to foster stronger economic cooperation, which is essential for sustainable solutions. Shifting to business news now, the African Export-Import Bank, AfriEximbank, has underscored its commitment to modernizing Africa's aviation sector at the 2026 Airline Economic Growth Frontier Global Conference in Dublin. Leading the delegation, Executive Vice President for Intra-African Trade and Export Development, Mr. Kanyano Awani, participated in high-level discussions on fleet renewal, innovative aircraft leasing models, aviation infrastructure, and enhanced regional connectivity. On the sidelines of the conference, AfriEximbank held bilateral meetings with the Nigerian Minister of Aviation, Festus Keyamo, representatives from the African Development Bank Group, AFDB, and Dubai Aerospace Enterprises. The discussion focused on financing aviation, modernization, establishing a dedicated aircraft leasing platform for Africa, and supporting the acquisition of next-generation aircraft by African carriers. AfriEximbank's collaborative approach to aviation finance was highlighted when the TAAG Angola Airlines received the Supported Finance Deal of the Year award for its Boeing 787-10 acquisition, financed in partnership with AfriEximbank and other stakeholders. The bank engagement reflects a broader strategy to expand Africa's aviation value chain, improve connectivity, and facilitate trade under the AFC-FTA framework. AfriEximbank noted by strengthening financing mechanisms and modernizing fleets, the bank aims to position Africa's airline to compete more effectively on global routes while boosting intra-African mobility and commerce. Industry analysts observe that improved aviation infrastructure and innovative leasing solutions are essential to unlock the full benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area, with enhanced overconnectivity serving as a vital driver of continental integration and economic growth. Now to sport news. The 2025-26 Total Energies CAF Champions League group stage concluded this weekend with 5 quarter-final places still to be decided, setting the scene for the thrilling final across the continent. So far, 3 teams have confirmed their progression. Title holds Pyramids FC, record champions Al Ahly and Stade Malien, leaving 5 remaining knockout spots for the grabs. Group A, Pyramids FC topped the group within 13 points and host Power Dynamos with qualifications already secured. The real battle is for second place, where Barkene and Power Dynamos are level on 7 points. Barkene face eliminated Rivers United and need to win to guarantee progression, while Power Dynamics must outperform Branque and overcome a head-to-head defeat. Group B, Al Ahly are safely through on 9 points. The contest for the second spot pits FAR Rabat 8 points against Young Africans. 5 points Al Ahly host FAR Rabat in the clash that could decide the group winner, while Young African must defeat already eliminated Kabylie and rely on other results to advance. Group C, this is the tightest group, with Al Hilal Omdurman leading on 8 points, followed by MC Alger 7, Memoladi Sundowns 6, and Este Lupapo 5. All 4 sides remain in contention. Hilal host Lupupo, while Sundowns face MC Alger in a winner tackles all cash in South Africa. Group D, Stades Melon to group with 11 points. Second place is a direct showdown between Esperance Tunis and Petro Atletico, both on 6 points. Esperance host Petro in a decisive match, while already eliminated Simba concluded their campaign against Stade Malien. As the group stage closes, fans across Africa can expect a weekend packed with drama, high stake, and unforgettable football moments. Now let's check out the latest weather forecast across the continent. That's all for this hour. Next up is an exclusive interview with a researcher on this year's AU theme of water and sanitation. We hope you'll stay and watch. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye for now.
Science researcher highlights the vital role of water for Africa's sustainable development and the importance of strong policy frameworks to ensure water security. He discusses challenges in policy implementation, Africa's role in global economic governance, and the need for peace and security. His long-term vision emphasizes multilateral cooperation and innovative strategies to help Africa achieve its 2063 goals and promote resilience and prosperity across the continent. Hello and welcome. I'm Gamachi Samandida hosting you. Mr. David Masgaba, welcome to our program. Today, of course, we'll be discussing the 2026 Africa Union Summit. And of course, the 48th Ordinary Session has already begun and some issues have been raised at the headquarters in Addis Ababa, the African Union's headquarters. And of course, the first question that I would like to ask you is, we know that water in this summit is the front issue, and how can the session's focus on water security contribute to the overall objective of Agenda 2063 and promote sustainable development across the continent?
Okay, thank you very much for having me, and it's a very relevant and timely question what you have raised. So let's start with what is sustainable development. So this Agenda 2063 is all about to bring development that's supposed to sustain Africa's continuity. So when you say development, it's all about quality of life. For example, human development indices, clean water, clean housing, very good infrastructure, quality education, and so forth, health services. So Africa, if it's trying to attempt, if it's attempting, or if it's making a development endeavor to achieve all this, water is the most important resource that it's having. So the other important issue is water. When we say water, when we read different books, including, for example, Dolatar and Gray, they just wrote Hydropolitics, a very well-known book with the title Hydropolitics. Water is the most important resource, very scarce resource. Specifically, potable water is very scarce. So even if the surface of the water is covered, the surface of the earth is covered with 75% of water, the potable water, the water that we can drink, is only 3%. And in this, Africa is very endowed, but naturally it's endowed, but we are not using it properly. So water is the most important resource, and giving emphasis on this agenda, specifically in this ordinary session, it tells us, or it gives everybody an information that African leaders are committed in trying to bring about sustainable change in African development. So water is the most important one. We can take different figures. For example, in the West, those major institutions, research institutions and others, somewhat forecast that potable water will be the most important scarce resource in the world that may invite us to conflicts. Conflicts may arise as a result of this one. So Africa, having major river systems, for example, we can take our Abai or the Nile, and what we are doing in Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's one of another important element of trying to reserve water for its use. So water is the most important resource, and the agenda is timely. I can say that it's a timely agenda in African context, continentally.
Yes. Let me come to access to clean water and sanitation and their influence on us. Yeah. Well, we know it's very obvious that water is life, and water impacts us. Access to water impacts the way we live. And it is very much true that this water, a very scarce resource, as you mentioned, translates into every aspect of our lives. And when you really take a look at it with a scientific lens, and when you look into it, especially, do you think, this access and sanitation really influence, all of us in what ways? Because when we go deep and examine, the situation, I believe that we come up with, interesting facts. Though on the surface, everybody believes and agrees that, water is very important. And it is true that access to clean water and sanitation influences us in every aspect. But when you look at it scientifically, how do you see the influence?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah. So when we talk about water damages, again, what we should have to put in our mind is, let's forget about potable water, but our body, 66% of our body is made up of water. This simply tells you, whether in physiology, in biology, in whatever form of study, human study, this tells you that the relationship between humanity and water is very important. It's one cannot exist without the other. That's for true. So water has an impact. For example, clean water, if Africa, continentally, if Africa and African states, African governments, the leadership, if they are supposed to provide clean water, potable water for the people, for the population at large, number one, in terms of pathology, in terms of disease and all other things, then we can minimize, for example, the death rate. For example, let's take child mortality rate, all those mortality rates which are related with waterborne diseases. So we can minimize. The other one, Africa, unfortunately, it's importing a lot of medicine from the West or from those manufacturing countries. So if we are supposed to provide clean potable water in every aspect, not only in potable sense, but in cleaning, in provision, in sanitation, in all aspects, then we can reduce our dependence in importing medicine from the outside world. Not only that one, for example, in academics, in epistemology, in ontology, for example, if we are supposed to develop our own researches on issues of water, either in chemistry, either in medicine, either if you come to political science, in hydropolitics, what strategies we are supposed to make and try to somewhat to transfer those mechanisms to the leaders, for example, in such big occasion, in such continental occasion, in such huge continental conferences, when the leaders are supposed to make a discussion, then this can be changed, these issues can transform into policy, and when those policies are going down to grassroots level, then they just have huge impacts. By the way, water, it's not only about sanitation. Water is having an important relation with conflict, with violence, even with development. You cannot think of any development without water. So this is a very timely ordinary session, and the issue of water is the most important one. As I have said, if African leaders, if the African states are supposed to pay the proper attention with regard to the issue of water, then the political, economic, social, and in terms of peace and security, all those aspects, the burden is supposed to be minimized. Maybe we just can have broader, not only vision, but success with regard to Agenda 2063. That's what I can say.
Okay, good, David. Well, water has always been, a very important topic of discussions, I believe. But this time, the African Union has heightened, the level to which, they give attention to water. And now we expect that, practical measures are likely to be discussed, in this session. And specifically, what specific policy measures are measures do you expect, to be entertained, just during this summit? Now, of course, the 48th ordinary session has already begun, and in the coming days, we'll have, just the leaders of many African countries who will convene in Addis Ababa, will discuss, just water policies, I believe. And at this moment, or in this session of the 2026 African Union Summit, what specific policies do you think will be discussed?
Yeah, again, this is a very good question. As I'm saying again and again, such medias, the importance of such media is we can forward issues with regard to policies, which policies are supposed to be adopted. So water, the issue of water with regard to policy, for example, we are having, as you know, we are having these streams the source of water. We are having underground water, very scarce one. So managing these resources, this very scarce resource needs a policy, a very clear-cut policy that would have to be designed. So what are the most important policies which will support Africans to not only manage, but to properly preserve the water what we are having, either in the underground or on those streams? So let's take with ecology, the environment. What we are doing here in Ethiopia, the green legacy. Unless and otherwise, we are supposed to play an important role in keeping the environment in par with the demand of humanity. Then such an issue needs a very important policy. Green legacy is one. Greening Africans. Then again, Africans, if they just would like to be united, the organization, what we are having is African unity. Unity is not only in politics, but economically, in sharing resources, water resources. Not only in sharing water resources, but in preserving. For example, let me give you a very simple example. What we are doing in the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is one way or the other, we are guaranteeing the continuity of the flow of the river Abai, and we are guaranteeing or promising Egyptians that this flow of water will continue the way it was before, because the greenery, the dam, the environmental protection measures what we are taking, the policies what we are trying to adopt, the lake, the Nagat, the largest lake what we have created, these are having an impact, not only in preserving the water, but in terms of, for example, creating what you call the clouds, for example, reclouding Africa in terms of moisture in whatever form. So policies should have to be discussed, but policy discussion should have to focus on politics, because if Africans are supposed to see each other in suspicion, then you cannot come about what you call a common policy. So politics should have to be taken into account. Economically, then in terms of social, let me give you a simple example: the Nile River. How many people think of the social bondage it's creating? How many people are taking and sipping water from this river? But do the people think this in terms of policy? Do the states think these things in terms of policy? No. So they should have to rethink again. So policies which incorporate politics, policies which incorporate economic issues, policies which incorporate social issues should have to be put into place. So the unity of Africa must not be only on a politics or on a slogan, but in sharing even resources too. Not only in sharing, but in preserving resources too. Not only in preserving, but in thinking about the coming future generation too. So we need, from all sorts of academic fields, those professionals, those researchers should have to come up and somewhat provide multifaceted policy. I cannot simply say this policy, but these policies just need researchers, just need professionals to come up with. So multiple policies are out there we should have to think of.
Yeah, good. Well, David, there is a question that always crosses my mind, which is everybody knows water is important, and the African continent, despite the fact that we have immense water reserve, especially under the surface of the earth or underground water, little has been done to extract this water and use it. And if you ask why, people would say we have lack of political will, we have lack of the infrastructure, the technology, and the finance. But researchers, strongly argue that the finance might be, so huge, but at the same time, once, you invest your finance, your huge finance, and then manage, to extract water, then the return is 10 times, tenfold, double, more than that. So why is it that, we haven't been able to harness, just our water resources yet?
Yeah.
What are the obstacles exactly?
We should have to see it from multiple perspectives. There is a political perspective, there is an economic perspective, what we should have to focus on. So let's think of bottled waters, for example. As you may know, and all of us know, for example, it was a sort of luxury to have a bottled water in Africa. The well-known brand was Evian from France. But in Africa now, come to Ethiopia, we are having multiple what you call factories,
water brands,
brands we are having. These are organic waters. I'm telling you, organic waters. For example, we can purify water through oxidization with very minimum. But the West, these big multinational companies which are providing bottled water, they just would like to block Africans to have access to this one because they just share their markets globally.
But Dwight, here I have a reservation.
Yeah.
Look, when people speak of, especially, when Africans speak of, obstacles, they rush, to point to Western companies or Western countries, etc. But I don't think, Western countries do really have, the capacity, the power to intervene to this level to stop us from using, our water or any other natural resources available to us. And as far as, the commitment is there amongst, African nations, do you think, the capacity of these Western institutions, companies, the countries themselves, will be able to stop us from harnessing our resources?
Yeah, that you are raising a good question. Yeah, no, we should have to stop the blame game. Yeah, I just shared that with you. What I'm trying to tell you is the historical background. Nowadays, thanks God, Africa is having multiple, for Africa, for investment, we are having multiple frontiers. We are having the Chinese, we are having from East Asia and other places. But as you have said, or as we just know, underground water, harnessing underground water is not as such simple and easy as you have said. It's a capital-intensive project, specifically in bringing about the machinery and so forth. Of course, we are naturally endowed with underground water. We are naturally endowed with huge amount of labor, but such industries just need what you call this technology. So we should have to go. We should have to go all the way there to achieve these things. As I'm saying again, having different cooperating what you call friendships with China and others we can do, but the most important thing is Africans should have to unite on this one too. As you have said, we just need a common policy. For example, rather than importing water from some other places, Africans, they can exchange bottled waters among themselves. The market should have to be created because Africa is having more than 1.2 billion people. But again, universities, technological companies, innovators, entrepreneurs, they should have to get an access. Easy, not easy, but very legal, profession-based access in making this one. So, for example, where are we supposed to get loans from in establishing these companies? Let me give you a very simple example. I think it is sodium hydroxide, water plus salt, a very simple technology. What you can use, for example, to avoid stroke, specifically when there's a shortage of oxygen in your mind. Stroke will happen in two ways. As I have read, one is through blood, or the other one is through lack of oxygen. Sodium hydroxide. We don't have that even in Africa. We are bringing sodium hydroxide, but that has to be clinically come to perfection. When we are importing that one from India or other place. So who is blocking us from getting this one? So what I'm trying to tell you is I'm not trying to blame others, but the African leaders, such conferences, such extraordinary sessions, as you have mentioned earlier, such making up policies will give us, for example, exchanging technology, building capacities. So we should have to make at least common policies, common approach, common technological transfer, capacity building, and so forth. So I think we can make on that one. But I share with you what I'm trying to share with you is we should have to stop the blame game and we should have to look into a different direction. Plan B, or we should have to have a contingency on this one.
African Union's representation in global economic forums such as the G20 will impact its ability to advocate for African interests in water development and security. Do you agree?
Yeah. Now, of course, for example, DEF, this is the Davos Economic Forum, as you have said. For example, if African leaders are supposed to go there with their own clean and clear plan with regard to what they want to do, and as you have said, for example, G20, the group of 20. This group, almost the most well-developed 20 countries, economically well-developed countries. For example, the issue of finance can be resolved, as you have said. Project management based on cooperation, financial provision, technical provision can have a huge impact on Africa. African leaders, for example, if they were supposed to have the right place, to be heard at this G20, then access to finance, to capital, access to technology, access to capacity building, this will be easier. But Africans should have to work in cooperative manner. As you have said, when we say G20, it's a huge amount of, the bulk of global financing capital is there. Not only global financial capital, you can take technology. Almost all advanced technology like aircraft, digitally, all technologies are produced in these G20 countries. Economically, financially, for example, you can take the United Arab Emirates. Again, you can take Saudi Arabia, for example. For example, if Africa is supposed to get good position in cooperating with the Saudis, for example, they are desalinating water from the seas, but we are being surrounded by Indian Ocean, Mediterranean, Red Sea, Atlantic. If we are supposed to get, if Africa is supposed to get the technologies, the know-how, the capacity, the financial provision, even rather than the underground water, we can keep, even we can use the natural waters from these oceans and seas. So as you have said, representation is always important, not only in G20, but ECOSOC, for example, UN ECOSOC, United Nations Economic and Social Council. For example, if we are supposed to have the right place to be heard, a position that gives us an access to be heard, then we can minimize so many hurdles with regard to finance, whether you call it finance, whether you call it technology, whether you call it investment, entrepreneurship, and so forth. So I just fully support Africa leaders should have to get an access in this G20, a clear and clean-cut position where they should have to be heard. They should have to go with their proposals, for example, project proposals. They should have to go there with their strategies, economic strategies on how to provide this water. By the way, water provision is not only about politics. It's not only about economics. It's not only about social issue. It's all about trying to somewhat minimize all those sorts of problems which are, by the way, the issue of water is not as such easy. There was a study in the United States of America. Unless and otherwise we try to manage the issue of water through policy, through governance and so forth, and then unless and otherwise we can manage these issues through preserving the ecology, a 1 degree centigrade increase in temperature, there is a 14% increase in conflict everywhere in the world. So the African leaders, they should have to cooperate with each other, to listen with each other and have a place in G20. And that's a very good question.
Let me take you back to the G20 summit that took place in South Africa last year. And during that summit, of course, South Africa managed to invite African leaders across the continent. And on that stage, African leaders managed to get heard, their voice. I mean, they spoke of, just their needs and their wants and their aspirations, and even, some media outlets, blaming South Africa for doing that. We know these G20 countries are so rich, so powerful, politically, economically, and what do you think, this particular, the 2026 Africa Union Summit should strategize so that, it will enhance Africa's position within the G20 and globally?
Yeah, this as you have said, the G20 meeting in South Africa was a success for Africa because, as you know, the West was giving more emphasis to Russia-Ukraine war. And at the same time, the West is also politically, economically, socially guilty for whatever sin it has committed on Africa and the other underdeveloped countries. So G20 is a forum. It's a place where you can raise issues. But as you have said, in whatever way they can, what they want to do is they just would like to block Africans from not to be heard. But taking this into account, this year's conference, 2026 conference of African, the summit of African heads of states and governments, it can embolden the position Africans are having with regard to their questions. Not only their questions, but their demands. And one of the most important demands Africans nowadays are trying to have or trying to tell the world is Africa, resource-rich continent. But economically, it's only taking part 3% in getting what you call revenue. From the global trade, Africa is getting only 3% of revenue. But contributing almost more than 50% of resources. So the African heads of state in this conference, taking their agenda from G20, it should have to be rolled over and given a sort of an important strategy. They should have to devise an important strategy. They should have to come up with an important question with regard to on how to attain and to address the issues for this 2063, the agendas. So that was the G20 summit in South Africa was a benchmark. It was a benchmark. It was a pillar in setting up Africans to see their goals. So I'm sure that taking a good lesson from this G20 summit, by the way, the G20 summit in South Africa was a huge success because the West was trying to reshape the agenda, to reset the agenda and everything, but Africans, respective of whatever the others were trying to do, they were being able to be heard, to raise their questions, to somewhat formalize and present their demands. So these demands that were being raised in G20 should have to be consolidated now. They should have to have a shape, a clear shape. What do Africa demand from the rest of the world? So they should have to come up with a policy, and they should have to provide to the West. And then how to harmonize their demands. Specifically, in presenting their interest with G20, they can harmonize their interests by taking this conference as a kind of a pooling mechanism. That's what I can say.
Yes. David, one last question that I want to ask is about, of course, conflicts and security challenges in Africa. Well, Africa has been doing its best, to progress economically, socially, politically, and we observe, just these outcomes of the leaders' efforts so far. Unfortunately, these conflicts are here and there. For instance, the Horn of Africa, Central Africa, this DRC, and West Africa, the Sahel, and many others. And we know, even though there are many reasons, grab for resources, which is, of course, propagated by, outside forces, powers. We observe, just these things. And what do you think, African leaders should do about it? The AU 2026 summit, which is taking place right now, I believe, the summit cannot ignore, peace and conflict in the African continent, and these scenarios will be, on the table for discussions. What do you think the strategies that will be set to address, these challenges?
What are the sources of conflict? What are the origins of conflict in Africa? We should have to think of this. When you think of conflict in Africa, we should have to think of its origin. Where are the sources? So as you know, when the West comes, or when Africa was being colonized, or when the first sea voyage, this open sea voyage by the West, specifically by the Portuguese, and when the Spanish were trying to go around Africa, the basic reason was, two basic reasons were there. One, the Black Plague, which have killed more than millions or maybe 1 billion. When you read books, it will tell you. And the other one was there was a famine in Europe. But once they just came into Africa, what they understood was Africa is resourceful. So what you have said, resource grabbing. That was the main issue. So with this colonization, not only before colonization, in slave trade, the West have sold more than 12 million, more than 24 million strong Africans to the Western Hemisphere. This is also resource. So when we talk about resource, conflict and resource are always related. Two major types of resources in economics. We are having the natural resources, then we are having human resources. Both resources have been abused by the West, either through slave trade, then through colonialism, and so forth. This resource grabbing, whether you can call it natural resource or human resource grabbing, has continued in Africa after decolonization. So if you see there was a discussion in economics in Holland. A very well-known economist in Dutch in Holland was telling, in whatever way possible, the West is dependent on African resources. So to avoid conflict, the African leaders should have to rethink, to re-evaluate, and to somewhat review what has taken place so far till this time. So how do we manage our resources? Resource management is a key issue. As we have raised questions, for example, as we have raised earlier, go to West Africa, the Sahel, the conflict in Sahel, the uranium, the natural resource, everything that was being focused by the West. The West tries to manage all those things. So Africans, what do? How do we avoid conflict? So conflict is having a political shape, conflict is having an economic shape, conflict is having a social shape. So all these issues should have to be addressed. Africa needs to avoid conflict. Africa needs to avoid conflict. And by the way, most of conflicts in Africa are having their roots exogenously. It's coming from the outside world. So how do we manage this one? Politically, how Africans should have to create a very stable political environment. Economically, how are we supposed to exchange our resources? How are we supposed to somewhat manage our resources peacefully? And then, again, socially, as I have told you, the waters which are flowing all the way within Africa, they are just kissing the lips of everybody. The waters are being kissed by everyone. We are drinking the same water. But how do we manage this one? So what lessons we should have to take? For example, as I'm saying again and again, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. This is a seal of promise for Africa. This is a seal of promise for the continuity of states like Sudan and what you call this Egypt. Abai, the river, I call it Abai because as long as it's flowing in Ethiopia, contributing more than 85% of the water since the beginning of nature. We have never ever requested a single coin from none of those countries which are using our water, our resources. But what we did now is we are trying to tell Africa, wake up, let's manage our resources properly. Then we can reduce conflict. So conflict management needs political will, economic will, social will from the leaders. So rather than thinking narrowly, for example, we Ethiopians, because we thought we are thinking in a broader sense, that's why we have tried to somewhat build this dam. As I'm telling you, it's a seal of a promise for everyone. It's a seal of a promise, not only a seal of a promise, but it's also a seal of a bright future for Africans. So African leaders should have to think of this in broader sense. Take, for example, Upper Volta, Lower Volta, the Volta River in Africa, in West Africa. Now it's getting dry and dry. Nobody is taking care of that one. Again, in other places, lakes are getting minimum, their sizes are getting minimum, and because nobody is worrying about the environment. So we should have to have a broader thinking. Conflict in Africa is having its sources from exogenous. I'm telling you, whether for the political systems, for the economics, for the social, what's been coming from the outside is affecting Africans negatively. So indigenous political thinking, indigenous epistemology, African-oriented epistemology, theory of knowledge we just need. As long as we are having curriculums which are imported from the West, not from the West, from the outside, as long as we are having our, what you call this, music, everything, social life and everything being imported from outside, as long as we are dependent on the Western technology and so forth, then conflict will continue. So conflict should have to be managed by managing African politics. So the best venue in managing conflict in Africa, either in politics, in economics, social affairs, is such conferences. So, for example, Africa should have to have a very strong security council of its own, very strong security council, organizationally. What Ethiopia did for Somalia in preserving the Somalian peace, what Ethiopia did in preserving the Sudanese peace, what Ethiopia, historically going back to Democratic Republic of Congo, the Zen Zaire, in Korea, what we have contributed is not as such easy and simple. So we should have to exchange our what you call policies. We should have to exchange our experiences. Then conflict should have to be managed through such conferences, such summits. Big summits should have to come up with a plan. That's what I can say.
Ms. thank you very much for the excellent interview you gave us today, especially for joining us here. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I'm very glad to be present here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Viewers, thank you again for joining us in today's program, which ends right here. Next time, we'll come up with similar important topics. Until then, goodbye.